Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Cagley. Tonight we have Dave Wischnowsky on. He's going to talk a little bit about the historical perspective as to where Bret Bielema and Brad Underwood sit in terms of what they've accomplished with the teams, where the basketball program and the football program are right now. This should be a lot of fun. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Dave in just a minute. Sometimes it's nice to put things into perspective. What I mean by that is I happen to be a history guy, and I like to compare and contrast coaches and players from different eras, which gets really tough. But I had the good fortune of meeting Dave Wischnowsky, who is a former columnist for CBS Chicago, the Tribune, the Ottawa Times. Being a U of I grad who was there in the mid 90s, he's had an opportunity to get experience with the Illini, and because he's had to cover sports and work in news, he also has a little bit of that way of looking at things that you're trained as a classic journalist. Dave, welcome to the show.
Good to be on with you. I'm excited to be here.
I know I didn't do the best job in the world. Give people a little bit of a biography for those folks who either A, haven't been able to keep up with you, or B, are just interested in what you're doing nowadays.
Yeah, well, I mean, I published a book back in 2004, back when I was a columnist in Ottawa, Illinois. My first line of my book was, "If nothing else, I am an Illinois boy." So I am born and raised. Spent the first 29 years of my life south of I-80. I've been up in Chicago now for the past, geez, it'll be 20 years next year that I'll be in Chicago. So I think I've got a really good perspective on the state of Illinois, both downstate and Chicago. Which a lot of people don't. I think a lot of Chicagoans think that, the world falls off a cliff at I-80. There's a lot of life south of I-80. But my background, journalism, I was a 98 grad from U of I, Bourbonnais native. When I was in college, I wrote for the News Gazette my junior and senior years, covered minor Illinois sports and a lot of preps at that time. Then I went to Ottawa. I was a sports writer there, became a general interest columnist and features editor, then jumped up to Chicago Tribune, where I was a Metro reporter and third person ever to write a blog for the Trib, actually. I helped pioneer blogging, wow, which wasn't respected as much as it should have been at the time. Was at the Trib for 2 years, then kind of saw the direction the newspaper industry was going once I left the Tribune and went into marketing. I've been doing that, but still had my fingers in journalism for quite some time. Not doing anything actively in terms of columns, but I wrote for CBS Chicago for 5 years. Did write my wish list newspaper column again for Kankakee and Ottawa newspapers up until 2020. And these days, I guess Twitter and Facebook keep me entertained enough from my journalistic perspective. I can provide enough commentary on there and interact with people, which I love doing.
That's how I first got to know you, is via Twitter. And then, of course, we met at an IlliniGuys tailgate and greatly enjoyed our conversation. So what I wanted to talk about tonight, and I think fans really enjoy this, if you subscribe to IlliniGuys.com, of course, there's a message board where fans will debate, argue, agree, very rarely with one another.
Happens every now and then.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And every once in a while, we have to stop the presses because two people agreed. One of the big things we talked about is putting the coaches that we have nowadays in perspective. And I have very strong opinions on this. And I wanted to know where you sat, because one of the threads talked about Bret Bielema's first 3 years were the most successful since really going back to Tepper right after Makovic.
Yep.
And my memory goes all the way back to Bob Blackman. So, that's just old. But when you're trying to put this together, how do you look at it as a fan and also as a guy who has been in the media and does a little bit of research to maybe back up some of your opinions?
Yeah, looking at Illini coaches, I think I've always, because really my memories really start with Makovic era, when I was really starting to closely follow the Illini. And then I was in college during the Tepper era and for the first year of Turner. Really looking at the programs they've inherited each time, I think it's been a big thing, because a lot of coaches have inherited a lot of really bad programs. Really, ever since Makovic left, every coach has inherited a poor program. So no one's gotten off to a fantastic start. Brett is, I was just looking earlier today at he's 18 and 19, 12 and 15 overall his first 3 years, which historically is pretty good for Illinois. That's the best. No one's had a winning record or even approached 500 since Tepper was 18-16-1, and then Makovic was 24-11-1 in his first 3 years. But Brett is he's taken over another poor program overall, but with a lot of NFL talent. So he kind of had a lot of the coaches have kind of had a breakout year in year three. When you look at Zook, you look at Turner, they had kind of surprising seasons at that point. Brett had kind of a year two breakthrough a little bit. And I think he's off to a solid start, but my biggest frustration is with all the NFL talent, because as much as Lovie Smith is vilified and looked at as a poor coach, I think he left the program with quite a bit of talent, and Brett did inherit a lot of NFL players, which didn't do as much as they could have. So it's been a solid start for Bielema starting out, but I feel like they left, not making a bowl game last season was really a disappointment. I felt like the season before they left 2 or 3 wins on the table that year as well, too. So I think we're heading into a pivotal year for Bielema. He really needs to show what direction the program's going. Historically, compared to previous, 4 or 5 coaches, he's looking pretty good, but that isn't a real high bar to meet for Illini coaches too,
Yeah, I will tell you, when I watch Illini coaches come on board, it scares me when I see the guys who win 0, 1, or 2 games, because it seems to me that even Illinois, who has had a pretty pedestrian program, with the exception of the Mike White, John Makovic era, I still think you should be able to win 3 games in a year. I'm talking going 3-8, 3-9. You should be able to roll out of bed and do that. I think Brett Bielema has found a way to raise that bar to the 5 level, which is good. But then the 5 level is so enticing because that means you probably at some point in the season left a bowl trip untended by a play, a game plan. What type of expectations do you have for this team this year? And if we are looking at a flex point, let's be real clear, neither of us think Brett Bielema is going to lose his job. It's just not going to happen. But what kind of flex point do you think this year is? And what do you think either the rewards for a good year or the consequences for a bad year are?
Yeah, I mean, this year is I think it's really an important season, as I said, where we go forward with, because I think that to your point, that Brett has raised the floor for Illinois football. I don't see him being the type of coach with his experience and his background that's going to have that 0 win, 1 win, really the bottoming out we've seen with other coaches. Even when they've reached heights, they've come back down to as low as you can go. My hope for this season, I think they can make a bowl game this year. I would love to see them make a bowl game. I think it would be really big for the team to do that for the program. I can't say I'm confident that they're going to do that, though. I think they're right around that 5-win mark again. I feel like there's probably 5. I'm pretty confident they can win 5 games, but can they get that 6th? Maybe. Could they get 7? Maybe, but I'm not real confident. And I think they've got some talent on the offensive side of the ball this season. Few defensive players. Some of these transfers they have in will be interesting. But I can't say that it's not like you see a clear upward trajectory. I feel like he's got them kind of stabilized where they are, but we need to see that next level with Bielema. And I really think he's got to start getting some true star players in there too, because I think the recruiting's been solid, not spectacular, and they haven't had the home run hitter type of guys that you really need, I think, to take that next step. And the Big Ten's just getting tougher too, with the Pac-12 teams coming in. Somebody's got to lose games, and unfortunately, Illinois is one of those teams I think that a lot of teams are looking at as a team they're going to beat, and we got to hopefully change that, but it's not an easy thing to do.
I totally agree with you there. And I do think that ability to recruit, well, he needs his own IO, to be honest with you. He needs that player who will have the ability to elevate a team, attract other individuals to come with him. There have been opportunities. Of course, next year, Illinois has 2 extremely highly rated tight ends in the state, and getting those kids to stay home has never been easy. Part of the reason why I don't like Notre Dame is growing up in Mahomet. You get really tired of reading the News Gazette's top 50 seniors and none of the top 25 go to Illinois, and 8 of them go to Notre Dame, and 4 go to Michigan, and 4 go to Iowa. And you just
Yep.
get frustrated with that. And somehow Brett Bielema has to break through that. As an alumni, and you get a very unique view of things because you do get to kind of rub elbows from the media side and
Mhm.
relationships you developed over the years. What do you think Illinois has to do different or better to help build that brand, particularly in that Chicagoland area?
I mean, really, I think it's always come down to wins. They've got to string together successful seasons. They can never get any momentum in terms of stringing together bowl season. Like it need to happen, not just these spikes once and then they fall back. And the remarkable thing in the 2000s was Illinois only went to 2 bowl games, and they were both BCS bowls, which is crazy. It's almost impossible to do that. Like you don't go to any other bowl games, but you go to a Sugar Bowl and a Rose Bowl during that decade. And it's just a crazy, it's such a unique, strange program in a lot of ways because the ceiling is very high for Illinois. I've always believed the ceiling is high. We saw it back with the White Makovic era, what Illinois football could be. Essentially back then, Illinois was Wisconsin and Wisconsin was Illinois. Wisconsin was terrible back during the 80s. So you see the potential that could be there. And I do feel like that with Bielema, they finally hired a true big time college football coach who knows how to build this, but breaking through with those players, because Illinois is a tricky state. You've got the state of Illinois and the state of Chicago when it comes down to it in terms of recruiting, and just breaking through because there are so many other Big Ten alumni here in the city of Chicago and the suburbs, and Notre Dame gets so much press. And even, I mean, I joke, I've made the joke several times on Twitter about how Nike Town on Michigan Avenue doesn't have any Illini Nike gear. You walk in there, you can buy Michigan, you can buy Ohio State. I think even Michigan State last time I was in there, but no Illini stuff. So it's just breaking through that consciousness. And I think it requires just consecutive seasons of winning football, which is easier said than done. And another issue is even though Northwestern isn't great, they've got a lot of media fans up here, and that's viewed as the team up here by the Chicago media, really much more than Illinois is downstate. I've always been frustrated how little coverage Illinois really gets in the Chicago media. So there's a lot of things working against them. It's not an easy job. I think Brett knows the things to do, but doing it is another nut to crack. That isn't the easiest thing.
Yeah, ironically, in doing research in various Heat Check and Hail Mary articles that I write, in 1989 and 1990 stand out in Illinois history.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't know why, but in 1989, John Makovic took the team to 10-2.
Yep.
And the next year in 1990, he took the team to 8-4. That is the only time in the history of the program that Illinois has won 8 or more games in back-to-back seasons.
Yep.
You can
That's
go back through
incredible.
100 years of history. It just doesn't happen.
Yep. I mean, that's an amazing stat to call out. And that with back-to-back bowl games, the bowl game string, the only time they've had back-to-back bowl games was the 2 years with Zook, I believe, wasn't it? With the buttressed up with the coordinators hired where they went
Yeah.
7-6, 7-6, even getting consecutive winning seasons. But you're right, they've never had 8+ wins in back-to-back years except for that. It's crazy because with all this is I think it's the 6th most populous state in the country now. I think Ohio passed up Illinois in terms of population. The fact that the flagship school for such a populous state isn't a perennial, a perennial power, really, they should be, but their annual also ran, is just a frustration. And it's one of the most fascinating things about Illinois too, that they just can't quite figure out football. You've got Dick Butkus and Red Grange, some of the greatest players ever in history. There's tradition there. There's laurels to fall on with those things, but they just can't quite get the program fixed. And I felt with Beal, I always felt like with Illinois, we're talking about coaches inheriting programs. Illinois was always, I felt like when they were hiring new coaches, they were always trying to solve something. Going back to Tepper, like Tepper was a defensive guy, so they brought in Ron Turner as an offensive coordinator. Then Turner couldn't recruit, so they brought in Ron Zook as a recruiting coordinator, essentially. And then after Zook, I've always joked that Tim Beckham was just an uncoordinator. They had nothing there with him. And then And then you brought in Lovey as a, a NFL guy. And now they finally got a true, I think, legitimate hot college head coach. And Brett's going to get some rope here to figure things out because you do have to give a guy some time to. You can't keep flipping things all the time. So we got to see where he can go, and hopefully he can elevate things. But getting to that 8-win multiple years in a row would be an incredible thing. They'd build a statue for Brett Bielema if he could do that, right?
Yeah, it is, and I don't think people understand just how bad it is. And I think some of that comes to, and I put a lot of that at the feet of Ron Gunther, who
Mhm.
somehow kept his job for decades with a sub 400 winning percentage in football, which is devastating for your sports
Yeah.
program as a whole. And he always, as you pointed out, he always was seeming to hire one guy who's the opposite of the guy that he let go, even to the point of doing it in basketball where Bill Self wasn't loyal enough. So you get the
Mhm.
loyalist guy in the world,
Yeah.
Bruce Weber. And it was just amazing, the hiring. And I always go back and compare this, and it's nightmarish, to Iowa, who hired Hayden Fry 1 year before Illinois hired Mike White, and then they hired Kirk Ferentz. That's all they've done in that years.
Amazing.
And Illinois has cycled through coach after coach and kind of ran Mike White out. I think he also was tired of the battles. I think he probably got a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And then Makovic, who we've had on the show and actually said if he could do it over, he would probably might not have went to Texas.
Yeah, it would have. I think that John had a really good thing going at Illinois. He could have, but I understand why he went to Texas. But the problem there with that time too is they gave him, they gave Makovic the athletic director title to hopefully keep him at Illinois. So when he left, there was no athletic director to hire that replacement, and they ended up with Tepper, who Tepper was a heck of a defensive coordinator at that time, but was just never a great guy, but just never really up to snuff with as a head coach. And it's just been a 3-decade slide really since then for the most part with a few, enormous spikes here and there. But it's just they've never been able to stem that tide. I really want to see Bielema. I'd love to see him do it, but he's got to, as I said, I've been disappointed with some of the losses that have been left on the table, and he's still got things to prove here, I think, very much so. And I hope that he can. I'd love to see him have success. And Illinois just to become a team that is a truly competitive team every season and not one that you're hoping maybe they can get to a bowl game. Maybe they can get to a bowl game. That's not a real fun place to be as a fan.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in that. I think Bielema's organizational skills are very strong. I am hoping that what we saw in the transfer portal this year, being able to address cornerback position, being able to address defensive line a little bit, never enough for me. If you give me 10 defensive linemen, I want 11, but that's a personal thing. But cornerback, wide receiver started to address those things, which indicated to me that he had some NIL support.
Mhm.
And Illinois needs to get into the football NIL arena. Ohio State's, if they say they're spending 20 million,
Oh
means they're
yeah.
probably spending 23.
Yep.
So you're going to have to do something to compete. And I'm not expecting Illinois to play at Ohio State's level. That's not what I'm saying. But if you have them leading the charge, that just puts pressure on other people to get into that. And Illinois really has to figure out the NIL fundraising, which I think is going to be reliant upon successful alumni, because Champaign-Urbana is only 150,
Right.
160,000 combined.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Columbus is well over 1 million. So
Mhm.
Ohio State can walk out and yell, "We need money," and probably have people come running. And just by the population density, Illinois is playing a game where they're trying to catch up.
Absolutely true. And it is, I mean, Illinois, let's be realistic. People get more excited about basketball overall than football. So it's not surprising that there's more boosters, donors excited to contribute that NIL money to basketball. And also, I guess you could see more of an immediate impact with those type of players coming in on the basketball court, just because there's fewer players on the court than there are on the field. But they've got to get to a competitive level with NIL. And there were some promising things this year. And just getting a big thing that helped Zook right there create excitement was getting Juice Williams and Aurelius Ben, like a true someone for really the fan base to galvanize around. It'd be awesome if it was an in-state quarterback was an incredible player that they could get, but someone, like you said, their own IO, someone really to generate that excitement and a true face of the program would be a big thing, I think, as well, too, in terms of just generating excitement and booster money towards the NIL program for football.
So let's pivot now in athletic terms, and we'll talk a little bit about the basketball program. I really look at the decade of the tail end of Bruce Weber's era, coupled with the John Gross era, and I look at where Illinois sits in terms of all-time wins in the Big Ten, and I keep thinking, if you somehow could have got the Bruce Weber hire, which I know the first 3 years were great, but if you could have got that hire spot on, Illinois might be the number one team in the Big Ten. I think Whitman got it right with Brad Underwood. And there are times I think it's just sheer force of will that he decides that they're going to do something. And then he just doesn't accept results that aren't up to that level.
Yep.
What is your impression of Brad Underwood and really how he took John Gross, between him and Weber at the end? They really took what was a Ferrari and turned it into a Chevette in a ditch. What do you think of Underwood's ability to resuscitate this program?
I mean, I've really been incredibly impressed with what Underwood has done. I thought he was the right hire at the time. I thought this guy looked like someone who had that ability to really elevate. Because when they hired Gross, who I don't think was really the first choice, I think Illinois had to settle. I think Mike Thomas had to settle on who he could hire at that time. But you know,
he was
he
Mike
had that
Thomas.
nice season. Yeah, Mike Thomas. Yeah. But he was 34-30 in the MAC. You know, he had that one good season. I think if you get too excited over one little run in the tournament, that, you know, you can't weigh that too much. A team can get hot, the ball can bounce a certain way. He was 34-30, and then you look at what Underwood was like, 59-1, I think, in his something like that. So I'm like, if you're going to hire a mid-major guy to come to a power conference, especially an elite caliber school like Illinois, you gotta, that guy needs to have really truly dominated that lower level. And I've looked at, I think Illinois has been on the precipice of being a true elite, like near blue bloodish twice before with after 89 hit with the sanctions. Then, you know, Illinois was on the cusp of being among the annual elite. And then again in 05, and after that with Eric Gordon decommitted and everything went south, and you know, end of the Weber and then into the Gross. So now I feel like Underwood's getting them back to that zone again, which is really exciting to see. And I agree, he doesn't settle. And you look what he's done. He had considerable turnover on the coaching staff multiple times. He just keeps upgrading really with the coaching staff. And I think it's been amazing. And I think he's had a vision for the program from the get-go as well, too. I know those first two seasons were not good, but I think he had to kind of tear down that, he had to rebuild that jalopy and back up into a Ferrari, because I just didn't feel like there was any accountability. There was no toughness in the program by the time that the end of the Weber era and the Gross era. Players were getting in trouble. You know, there was just, and I don't feel like they were really held accountable for things. And he had to rebuild what was a soft program into instill his toughness. And I know people have criticized Brad for being too tough on the sidelines and things like that as well, too. But I think his program has adopted that mentality now, and we're starting to see the results of that. And I still feel like the sky's the limit for the program. I think it has as high of a ceiling really as anyone in the country, Illinois basketball.
Making it to the Elite Eight seems to have motivated him as head coach even more. It's not like he was a guy who was an easygoing guy anyway, but it seems like that has really motivated him to the point that now that he's gotten a taste of that, he wants more. And that's exactly what you want. You don't want somebody who goes, wow, I went to the Elite Eight, and go put your feet up on a chair and have a mint julep and take the summer off. Instead, we've seen him take basically two players and build a roster that, in my opinion, it may have a lower floor than last year's team, but I think it's got a higher ceiling if everybody plays well, because of the fact more guys can shoot.
Yep.
Now they've got a couple people in the middle. And I also think the subtraction, and I'm going to say this, a lot of Illini fans will be mad, but thank God Zach Edey's gone. I'm tired of Zach Edey, and I'm not going to knock the guy. The guy was a force of nature in
Yeah.
there. And if I go back and look in my era, you got to put him up there with the Ralph Sampsons, Patrick
Mhm.
Ewings, and Shaquille O'Neal's for the dominance that he displayed
Yep.
as a collegiate player.
Yep. I agreed. I think him being out of the conference opens the door up. Purdue, I'm sure, will still be a nice team this year, but they're not going to be this fearsome team that they have been. And Edey, to his credit, he's not just big. He's a skilled player, a heck of a player. You know, I went to the Final Four and watched him perform there. The guy's heck of a talent. And him being out does open the door for, I mean, Illinois has been competitive right there with them too, but they haven't been able to get over the hump against Purdue. And I think that that's a hump that they're perfectly capable of getting over without Edey there. And it has been, again, testament to Underwood not settling with so many, because, I don't think anyone saw the amount of turnover that we have seen with the Illini roster this year, but I think Brad saw what he need. He wants more shooters. He knows he needs. I'm excited they actually have some true ball handlers, court generals that I feel like they're on the team this year too, and some nice players. But a lot of the guys I think that left were a little bit one-dimensional, not as strong of a shooter. And this team, we'll see how it comes together. I think it could be a little bit rough to start the year with so many new guys in there, and they have a really daunting schedule. They'll probably take a few losses. But by the end of the season, March, I think this team has a potential to really be higher than last year. And their ceiling last year was the Elite Eight. And if not for running into UConn, I mean, they very possibly could have been a Final Four team if they're in any other bracket, except maybe Purdue. And
Yeah.
Purdue might have.
Yeah.
So, it's exciting to see because there's so many new faces, but man, some of these players, I really think there's a elite level of talent up and down the board. And one thing will be keeping them all happy as well too, because I think that's basically impossible to do. There's probably going to be transfers every year for these days, but it's exciting. They've got a lot of weapons, and it's going to be a fun season to watch.
I particularly want to see Will Riley, who demonstrated in the EYBL that he can get shots and score. When you get over 40 points in an EYBL game, that is not easy to do just because of the time that the game takes. And for those who haven't coached AAU or watched a lot of it, the referees are basically told, you need to get this game over. So chop, chop. And so there's a lot of things that aren't fouls and a lot of things just keep the clock going. And if you can get over 40 points in an EYBL game, you're doing that at the highest level, competing against guys who are at your level. That was an impressive thing. And I think Kasparis Jakusionis is going to be a heck of a discovery. We're seeing the films of him on the World Championships.
Yep.
And I do think that guys like Rickhouse, he's got the ability to basically do the booty ball that you saw, except he's 3 inches taller than Domask.
Yep.
And you start looking at it, and they're going to have a big who, unlike Kofi, will have the ability to pull guys out to the three.
Yep.
Yeah, nobody's as physically imposing as Kofi, but you're still looking at 7'1" and 250 pounds and can go over either shoulder.
Yep.
This team is going to have that. And I haven't even talked about Merez Johnson. Kedrick Prince is fairly well plugged in. He keeps saying, don't sleep on Trey White. And what happens if each of these guys plays well? This could be an unbelievable team. I'm going to ask you, does it seem like an Izzo team? Because they might have to take some time to gel, and they have a really tough early season schedule.
I could see that. It feels like it does have some similarities there, because that's always been Izzo's hallmark, is scheduling incredibly tough. But what that does is it toughens the team up for late in March, and that's when he has his teams peaking, and that could be the case. I mean, there's so much talent this year. Who knows? Maybe they'll come out right away and play really well. Some really big. That wouldn't surprise me either, because just the sheer level of talent. But I would encourage everyone to take a step back and be a little cautious and expect that there's going to be some bumps here, because there are so many new guys that haven't played with each other, and just different personalities from all sorts of different cultures and everything as well too. That I would think it'd take a little while for them to all get to know each other in that way. But there is some similarities with Izzo teams, and then I'm just excited about all the different types of skill sets they have this year. And I still like, if Ty Rodgers can hit a shot at all, I like Ty a lot.
Yeah.
I think he could. He's an incredible athlete, and he does a lot of things really well. They were asking him to do some things last season. I don't think he really does. That's not his strength. And if he can find a role where he actually fits his skill set, could be exciting as well too. So there's just so many guys, because I feel like any guy, I bet there's a lot of games this season where they have different leading scorers. I could see the different guys have blown up on different nights, and it's exciting where Underwood's got the program back, and bringing in Antigua is a big thing with getting Will Riley kind of swooping in. I think you're going to see more of that with Orlando, just with his recruiting ability as well too.
Yeah, I think for the first time we've seen Illinois actually do what gets done to them, where a Duke or a Kentucky or a Kansas parachutes in at the last minute, Cliff Alexander,
Yeah.
and grabs a recruit. And nobody thought Illinois was going to get Will Riley. And if you go back when Kedrick Prince and Brad Sturdy were telling people this looks good, the rest of the country was saying, oh, Illinois wasn't even barely being mentioned. And I think that's the off case of about three things. One is you made it into the Elite Eight, and kids pay attention to that. I really believe most prospective college players watch the NBA until the NCAAs, and then and maybe even the conference tournaments too, but for sure the NCAA tournament. So that was the key. Having Orlando Antigua with those relationships that he's developed when he was at Kentucky is important. And people don't understand, if you ever get a chance to meet Orlando Antigua, here's his superpower. And as a former VP of sales, you don't run into this very much. But when you meet Orlando Antigua, you would swear that when he got up in the morning, his number one goal was to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so you walk away from that conversation energized because he's that good at interpersonal communication. And then I think the third thing, which was really important this year, was Terrence Shannon Jr., despite everything, was drafted in the first round. And Io is climbing each year in the NBA. So now they have street cred. And I think the fourth factor that people don't think about is Adam Fletcher. People see what he does for players. And then if you go into Ubben and you go walk around that facility, there might be a few better facilities out there, but there aren't very many. And that facility gives them a huge advantage. And I can only imagine, because the women's portion is also spectacular, how good that is for Shauna Green and her team. But I think those things coming together is allowing Illinois to parachute in. And I didn't even get to talk about Tim Anderson, who, if you put a recruit and say, get him, I don't know how he does it, but he gets him. And then Jeff Alexander has proven by getting Boswell, by going over to Europe, he can get people. So I think this may be an opportunity to see that happen a little more often for Illini. And not that you're going to drop in, because as Bill Self once said, if you're not getting told no, you're not recruiting the right players.
Right.
But I think they're getting to the point we're going to see that more often.
Yeah, I agree. They have so much to sell. To your point now, you've got there's some major tournament success now that's part of the selling package. Fletch, I mean, you just look at those before after photos of the players that are coming in. They're coming in from other top programs, and he's completely transforming their body. I mean, they're not like they're coming in from just high school kids. These are kids coming in from other major programs, and within a couple months, they've already shown major results. And it's amazing what he does. And I think, Orlando's able to come in as well too and authentically sell Illinois, because he was already here at Illinois already with Underwood as well too. He's not having to come in and try and sell a new program or something he already knows intimately well, and had a good relationship. It shows Underwood's relationship as well too, that Orlando wanted to come back, and I don't know if I don't think he would have left Illinois for anywhere else but Kentucky and Calipari at that time as well too. So there are all those great things to sell, and the recruiting staff up and down the board has been just killing it with guys. So Illinois is in there, and there has been a changing of the guard kind of with some of the elite programs as well too, right? With Kentucky has a change in coaching now. Obviously, Coach K is out at Duke, although Shire is still recruiting very well. But There's some of the self is still there at Kansas, but you're seeing a little bit of shifting that Illinois has an opportunity to move up there, and Underwood, I think, to move into that really upper echelon of coaching. He needs still to stack a few more really excellent seasons together to get up there with the absolute best, I think. But he's on that right path, and Illinois has so much to sell, from the facilities to the guys, getting some guys in the NBA now, and players are seeing that. And I also think that Underwood stood by, Terrence last season as well too, is something that probably resonates with kids and their families too, seeing how he's got his players back, even when they're going through the type of things that Terrence was going through last season.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And really, there's only two other things he's got to check off: a national title,
Yep.
very close to that, and then a one and done. And
Mhm.
you may not have any this year. You could have two this year. It's hard to know. But
Yep.
those are the last two things. If Illinois were to get that national title,
Mhm.
and KJ and Riley or one or the other goes pro, now all of a sudden you're in that era. I would tell Illini fans they're so close to that. You go to the Self in the first 3 years of Weber, and
Mhm.
Illinois had 6 seasons in a row with single digit losses.
Mhm.
That is not easy to do. I don't care who you are.
Yep.
That put Illinois in a rare air for Illini fans who really weren't around for the 80s. Lou Henson had the team cooking and then ran into getting into trouble with the NCAA, where the first line of the NCAA speech was, although we haven't found any evidence of improprieties, the number of accusations, and then managed to get a lack of institutional
Yep.
control for having nothing being proven.
Couldn't prove anything. I know
Yes.
it's yeah, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's been extremely. I mean, it's just a typical Illinois. It seems like, whenever we're right there, something happens with it, and that's my fingers crossed that Underwood and his staff can avoid that here, because I hopefully they can finally reach that peak and stay at that peak. And there's still, as you pointed out, if they can ever get that national championship, and I do feel like Underwood's going to get a national championship at Illinois here at some point. It may be in the near future, which would be awesome to see. But if they can get there, then the program really just obviously reaches another level. Because I've long felt it's the best program in the country to not have a title. So it's got to come at some point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The other thing is Underwood's background in the JUCO arena. He understands how to
Mhm.
build teams from literally almost no returners. It's
Yeah.
funny because he talked to us about that in the media 3 years ago. He pointed out that there were years that he would have 12 new players. And now all of a sudden, when you look back on that comment, was he trying to tip off what he thought the future was going to be, or was it just a comment? I don't know.
I don't know. It could go either way. But you're right. That's a great point, that he's not unfamiliar with this world as a JUCO world where you have constant turnover. You're only going to have guys for 2 years max, and probably often 1 year for a lot of the guys. So it's like you got to put together a team. And now you're not just trying to put together a team. If you're armed with the NIL, you can actually put together a really good team, which, I mean, he hasn't skipped a beat. Underwood and the Illini staff, when entering this NIL world, I feel like they've been running it better than just about anybody in the country, and really feels comfortable with it. It doesn't seem to have. I think others, you see Izzo, for example. I don't think he likes it. He doesn't like the way things have changed. And there's other coaches out there as well too, but Brad and the staff really seem to just lean into it, and like, this is the new reality, and let's go out and dominate with it. And so far they really have.
Yeah, and that's why he has 3 titles in the last
Yeah.
4 years.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts as we were talking?
Not really. I mean, we've had a great conversation about both football and basketball here. I'm hopeful for the football season. I'm excited for the basketball season. I'd love to go in at some point and start being excited for football seasons and really feeling like Illinois has a chance. It's a whole new world. Really, I guess most teams with these giant conferences are playing. A bowl game should be your goal every year for a lot of the teams, because it's going to be difficult to win conferences unless you're at that really elite level. But football, I think Brett's got a lot of potential at head coach there and elevating it, and I think Underwood's proven already what his ability and potential is. But it's just taking it to that the top, getting to that Final Four, getting to that national championship game, and winning it all. And I could see that happening in the near future as well, too, for basketball.
Boy, would that be something that would be heaven for an Illini fan?
I got my
No,
Cubs World Series in 2016. The one thing that number one, that was my number one on my list to see in my lifetime. Number two, 1A, I guess, really has kind of been a Illini basketball championship. So that would be incredible if it can happen. It'd just be absolutely amazing.
thank you so much for coming on tonight. I think there's no better way to close than that.
Thanks, Mike, and keep up the great work you guys are doing, Illini guys. It's awesome. Love everything you guys are doing.
Appreciate it, sir. Big thank you to Dave for coming on to the show tonight. Kind of him to stop by. He is a great individual that I had opportunity to meet basically at an Illini Guys tailgate. So you never know when you might end up on a podcast because you approach the wrong person at a tailgate. We really love having him come and take a look at things from an alumni standpoint and from a guy who's had to cover a lot of things in the media. So he can give a unique perspective that a lot of people just can't match. And of course, if you want to get perspective of a lot of people, IlliniGuys.com is where you want to be. We have message boards where you can connect with Illini fans all over the world. You can argue with them about just about anything you want. You get all the articles and you have all the access to everything Illini Guys. We'd love to have you there. $99 a year. The price hasn't gone up a penny since we started in 2021. And of course, you can also find us on IlliniGuys.com channel on YouTube. And you can find Eye on the Illini on literally every podcast distributor out there. So I would ask you, wherever you're at, please subscribe, whether it's YouTube, whether it's a podcast distributor. And if you can share us on social media, there is no more powerful way for us to do well than to have people give us a thumbs up and ask their friends to listen. With that, go Illini.